welcome back to my video. If you are new here, my name is Amber Scott and this is my weekly Bible study. Okay. So yes, this past week I posted a video on Sunday and Wednesday to cover 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel because I didn't do them in one video, but today we are going to be doing 1 Kings and 2 Kings together in one video. Yay! So if you read the books of 1 Kings and 2 Kings, then you probably got pretty bored because they're just stating the historical facts of who the kings were of the different parts of Israel. So I have to say, while I was reading it, it was a little bit boring and I did have a little bit of trouble focusing and fully understanding what was going on. So I did have to go back when I was doing the questions in the Bible study and have to kind of refresh my memory and jog some things like, oh yeah, I remember reading that, but I didn't really remember what character it was or who it was. But the Bible study does a really good job at like reeling all those people in and making sure that you understand the important parts of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. So if you recall to last week, or the past Wednesday and Sunday of last week, you'll see that we talked a lot about King Saul, and then we talked a lot about King David, and this time we're talking a lot about King Solomon. So we know that Israel had the 12 tribes, right? The 12 tribes of Israel. We talked about that in the past several weeks leading up to this time period. So once Solomon had become king, we discovered that he basically was the reason that Israel split into two sections, the north and the south. The north was still called Israel. It consisted of 10 of the tribes, and the south, which was called Judah, consisted of 2 tribes. So even though there was quite a big difference, Judah still had a lot of things going for them. For one, the city of Jerusalem, and it had the temple for the bloodline of David. David was again considered one of the best kings in existence ever. So to have his bloodline and a temple in his bloodline was a huge ordeal for Judah. So although they were smaller, they had a lot of really good things going for them. And because of that, they lasted over 100 years longer than the North did. So something really cool that the Bible study does, or that the Bible study does, is it actually gives you this cool little timeline. And it just shows you the North and South kings and the rulers, how long they reigned, and whether they were good kings or bad kings. And the awesome thing is, you'll notice this is my handwriting. It actually gave it to me to where I could fill this in. And not only did it do that, it also gave me a key, like an answer key, so that I could fill this in and have this really cool visual timeline that helped me to understand who was king and what time period and how many were good and how many were bad and why this happened and why this happened. It was really awesome that the Bible study included that. So I suggest, if you are on this journey with me, to Google image this and see if you can find something similar to this. If not, get a scrap piece of paper and jot down, like pause the video and jot down anything you can to help you remember who is who and why things happened the way they did. So back to real time. So looking at this chart, you can see that all of the kings who reigned in the north were all considered to be bad kings. Now, the south did have a little bit different. They had some good kings, they had some so-so kings, and they sure as heck had their share of bad kings too. But at least they had something going for them, right? One of the first questions the Bible study asks is, who were the good kings of the south and what made them good kings? Essentially, if to be a good king, you had to do everything that King David did, essentially. Now, of course, not everyone was King David, not everyone was as good as him, but in order to be considered a good king, you had to continue his works, continue King David's line of work, if you will. So the first king was Asa, which sounds like a girl name, but it wasn't. It was a he. Asa was a good king because he came in and he got rid of all the wrong idols that were before him from the former king, and he chose to follow God's heart and to worship God, which is essentially the most important thing, right? So from 872 until 848, you can see that Jehoshaphat was the next king. He was good because he followed the ways of his father, Asa. He continued the works that Asa had been doing, which made him a good king because he didn't screw it up. Like the next several kings you can see all kind of screwed it up. And then we have some so-so kings that come in and try to make things better, but then it doesn't get really better until we get to 725 to 686. That is where we see Hezekiah come in. Now Hezekiah was considered a really good king because he followed the ways of King David. He was considered to be kind of runner-up to King David, so he really helped get Judah into this better place of not worshiping idols, of worshiping the one true God, and giving God the glory for everything instead of these other pagan gods and these idols that they were trying to worship and be corrupt with. And then lastly we have Josiah. Now Josiah was king from 640 until 609. Now, fun fact about Josiah, he was actually the king that was only 8 years old when he was appointed king. Can you imagine being 8 years old and being the king of this huge nation? And even though Judah was a small nation compared to Israel, it still had this enormous amount of people. If you think about the Israelites being over like 2.5 million people, I think, in the beginning when Moses was their leader, I can only imagine what their population is now. That would be a fun fact. Look that up. Leave that in the comments down below if you look that up, because I'm curious. So if we look back at all of these good kings of Judah, we realize that there is one thing they all have in common. They all followed the original ways of King David. King David was the example. He was a man after God's own heart, which we talked about this past week. He is the example that all of these good kings followed. Now, as we see, the South had some of their good kings, but the North had all bad kings. Not even so-so, all bad kings. Which one of them was the worst? Well, it was Ahab. So when I was reading about King Ahab, I didn't really realize how awful he was until I remembered who his wife was. His wife was Jezebel. And if you've never heard of Jezebel, she's a very interesting character in the Bible, may I tell you. She basically was a person who literally sought out Christians because she hated them. She despised people that worshipped God, but yet she married the king of Israel, which is funny. Anyway, so basically this man who was supposed to be the king and worshiping God, Ahab, married Jezebel, this pagan woman who hated people that worship God and who worshipped other pagan gods herself. You can see where this is going, why he was the worst king ever. So essentially Ahab started worshiping pagan gods and other idols, right? Well, eventually that led to him ignoring the prophet Elijah's prophecy that he was going to go through a 3.5-year famine. Elijah told him this, and he ignored him because he's like, oh, this crazy prophet from God, you know, whatever. He ignored him, and they went through a 3.5-year famine. His biggest downfall is when he murdered an innocent man because he refused to listen to God. God literally told Ahab, he was like, I need you to kill this person. But instead, Ahab created a treaty with this man, and then he ended up killing another innocent man, and it just like, you know, when you tell one lie and then you gotta tell another to cover the other one up, and then it just becomes this huge snowball, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I have really got myself into a hole. That's basically what Ahab did, except it wasn't lies. It was like real life situations and real life people that he was supposed to be the king of. It got ugly fast. But I do want to point out something that happened at the end of Ahab's journey. Ahab did end up feeling sorry for what he had done, and he repented to God. He literally repented to God in his old age. God listened to him. God actually showed grace and mercy to Ahab, the worst king ever, the worst, vilest, cruelest king ever. God showed mercy to. That is so powerful to me because I am by no means perfect, and I never should deserve the grace and mercy that God has given me every day. But when I think about the fact that God loves everyone so much that he showed the worst king mercy and grace, why am I shoving away God's grace and mercy if He is willing to give it to each and every one of us in that capacity? It's just so amazing to me. It is seriously so amazing to me to think about that. Again, I bring up the fact that Ahab was truly sorry. He truly repented. It says that in the scriptures that he went around very meekly. He lay on the floor in prayer. He did all these things. He fasted. He did all this crazy stuff because he was truly, truly sorry for what he had done. And he had his eyes opened and realized, like, wow, I was an awful king, and actually asked for God's forgiveness. And God showed it to him in His own way. And that also reminds me of the fact that, like, sometimes our grace and mercy that God shows us isn't going to come in the way that we want it. It's going to come in the way that He is going to give it to us, because He knows better than what we could ever imagine. So the big summary of 1st and 2nd Kings is that it's pretty much a historical book telling you all about the kings and the order that they ruled and whether they were good or bad and why they were good or bad, or so. So it can get really boring and a lot of names that I can't even begin to pronounce, okay? Can't even begin to pronounce. But it has a lot of meaning to it. There are several stories in there, and I could go on and on and on and talk about them forever, but no one wants to hear that. How all the different stories of the different kings and what we can take away from those kings and those people and their lives. So I do suggest reading it, but I suggest probably giving it more than just a week to read, because I only got to really dive into this at a surface level of like retaining the knowledge rather than diving into it on a spiritual level. So this video isn't quite as much of a spiritual level Bible study, of more just a knowledge level of knowing about the kings and knowing when they ruled and who they were and if they were good or bad, which is still really informative and really cool to know. So that's all I have for you guys this week. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a like or a thumbs up and leave a comment in the description below. If any questions or things that you guys have, I would love to be able to talk to you, and I mean that with all sincerity. I seriously mean that I want to have conversations with you guys. I think that this would be something that is amazing that we can inform other people about and to create a community with. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and as always, remember, the Bible is good for you. Bye guys!